Happy weekend, Aspire leaders. I'm so excited to be back in Colorado after spending the week in Hot Springs, Arkansas. What a fantastic time where I got to meet aspiring leaders and hang out with the Teach Better crew, Chad Ostrowski and Jeff Gargis. Chad had the keynote session for one of the days and just absolutely killed it on artificial intelligence. Myself and Jeff Gargis had a pre-conference on how to get the most out of their iMac laptops, and then also had some sessions on Aspire to Lead, my book, and then on leadership capacity, which will also be the main topic for this upcoming week, as myself and my family are going to go to Breckenridge as I'm going to be keynoting at the MELC conference on not only leadership capacity, but then also strategies to enhance mental health as a leader, which is a super important topic and one that we all need to be focused on over the summer. So pumped to be able to share this message with so many educational leaders next week. And in line with that topic, I've got a fantastic guest this week, Alyssa Gallagher, and she's the co-author of Embracing Messy Leadership. In this conversation, we're going to discuss common challenges, not only in the United States, but all over the world, and how there are some universal hurdles that we all deal with. And Alyssa does a wonderful job of sharing practical strategies to help navigate through the evolving landscape of education and leadership. So stay tuned for a rich conversation filled with a lot of actionable advice and thoughtful reflection on leadership and embracing the messiness of the educational world. Welcome back, everyone, to Aspire to Lead, where we will be discussing the visions, inspirations, and experiences from top educational leaders. My name is Joshua Stamper, and you can connect with me on Twitter or on Instagram at Joshua_Stamper. All right, Aspire leaders and Teach Better family, I am so excited for my guest, who is an author, a brilliant coach, and someone who's working with educators all across the country. Actually, I should say world, 20,000 leaders that have been coached, and we're going to talk about that, and just a phenomenal book. But with that, Alyssa Gallagher, thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead this evening.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes. All right. I need to know the 20,000. I usually ask folks about themselves. We'll definitely get your background, but that number is outrageous. That is so many folks for the book.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a huge number, but I have to share the wealth. To be really clear, they're not 20,000 educators that I've worked with.
Sure.
There are 20,000 educators that have been education leaders, and that's at all level of leadership, right? So we really consider from teacher on up leaders. Most of the leaders that we've coached have been site level or central office or district level, but they've been coached by our group. We have about 300 coaches, and we're a nonprofit org, BTS Spark. And so they are leaders who have gone through one-on-one coaching and, had that confidential space to kind of divulge what they're working on, what's hard, what's hard about school leadership. And there's a lot that's hard about school leadership.
Yes. And we're going to dive into that specifically. Yes. So Alyssa, I would love for my audience to learn a little bit more about your background. So will you just share kind of your educational and leadership background with all of the folks that are listening?
Yeah, I'd love to. I would say, at heart, I'm a teacher. I started as a K-1, kindergarten, first grade. I had a split classroom teacher, and then had a pretty traditional career, right? Where I aspired to more. I changed grade levels. I moved up in grade levels, eventually found my way into administration, was a assistant principal and then a site principal for a number of years. Never thought I would find my way to the district office, but did, and ended my school career as assistant superintendent. I'm based just outside of Los Angeles. So all up and down California, from San Diego to San Francisco, spent 20 years in the system, and then thought that I was just going to hit pause for a while. I was doing a lot of work around reimagining education, using design thinking, working with the Stanford D School. And I co-authored 2 books around design thinking, did some work there, and then did a pivot, ended up working for a business author, Liz Wiseman, who authored Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter. So had the privilege, and really a privilege, to work with her and learn from her and support leaders, both in the education sector and in the corporate sector. And then COVID hit, and I had to re-examine my life and go, what am I doing? I miss my educators. I want to be full-time there. And so I found BTS Spark and have been working with BTS Spark ever since, really just connecting education leaders with support.
Oh, I love it. And I had to laugh because, I mean, I feel like COVID was such a pivotal point for so many folks to reimagine and reevaluate their life about, what the future was going to hold. So I'm so glad you came back to the educational sector and are helping so many folks. So with that, I would love for you to just kind of touch on the Embracing Messy Leadership book that you co-authored and just share a little bit about the resource, why it's helpful for our aspiring and current leaders, but then also why did you feel like this was such an important book to get out?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I co-authored it with our global director. So as I mentioned, we're a global not-for-profit. I am in charge of, I co-lead BTS Spark US. So I focus on the West and Central and report into our global director, Rosie Connor, who I co-authored. And she had the foresight, more than a decade ago to start BTS Spark. She's based in Australia, so has been doing good work in Australia. And when I started 3 years ago, it was really interesting to me to dig into sort of the data. Now, one of the things about coaching is it's completely confidential. So we match all of our school leaders with a coach who's outside of their school district, really doesn't have that close, intimate connection. Many of our coaches, they're all ICF certified, International Coach Federation certified. Many have a background in school leadership, but they have that anonymity. That's a tough word to say, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And so, while these conversations are confidential, on the back end, our coaches kind of just tag keywords. What are the challenges that leaders are struggling with? So when I do a download of data, I don't know who said them, but I know these are the issues and the struggles that leaders are struggling with. And so looking at our data, it was like, wow, we are sitting on a gold mine. We have 20,000 leaders who have had these conversations with leadership coaches, bringing their concerns, their struggles. And in turn, our leadership coaches are sharing strategies and tools and really helping to develop and grow these leaders. And so there was the intent in first writing. Well, first it was the research, it was like, is there any commonality? Like, can we identify, are there common struggles? Are there common global struggles, or is leading a school in the US so wildly different than Australia or the UK that there was no way we could make a comparison? So we went into the research with a lot of questions, really wanting to understand kind of top struggles. And then our intent, once we identified those, we're like, wow, this is insightful. And we could actually help leaders. We hope that every leader has the resource to have a coach, but that's not the reality. Let's face it, they may not have the resources, they may not have the time. And so because we exist to have impact, it was sort of this aha of, well, how can we share the tools to a wider audience? So our intent was twofold. It was, let's share what we have, let's share what are the struggles, what are the resources to try to help people have tools to improve their own leadership development. And then the second thing was, I remember being a school principal and feeling completely isolated. I had my colleagues, I had a mentor, I had district office staff, I had a lot of support. And yet there were days that I would feel so alone, and I would secretly wonder, am I the only one struggling with X, Y, or Z? Or do other people struggle with this too? And so my sort of secret hope in writing this is that leaders will feel seen, that they'll realize, one, you're not alone. And a lot of the struggles are kind of core leadership struggles that are pretty universal globally with school leaders.
Well, I can assure you, Alyssa, that you are not alone in that feeling, because I think I've talked to so many, folks over the years, and that is a common theme. And so I want to touch on those common pieces because, like you said, right, 20,000 different leaders from teacher all the way up. And you said that you were doing some research and finding those common challenges. So I'm curious, as far as your observation with the data and some of those conversations that you've had, what are some challenges that were universal, but then what were some things in regards to strategies? And I know you touch on that in the book to kind of help leaders navigate those universal common challenges.
Yeah, so I'm happy to dive in. We identified nine that were really just kind of rose to the top. And this is not to say there are many more challenges. This is not to minimize anybody's leadership experience, but this is all with the lens too of leadership development, right? So this isn't necessarily bringing in your most recent challenge with a parent. It might be. It's not necessarily like a school board member challenge, those kinds of things, political, school shootings, all of the things that we know that leaders are dealing with. But it's like boiling down at the core, like what is a leader really struggling with in terms of developing as a leader? So just to touch on a few of them, some of them I was actually a little surprised. The top theme, and this resonated across all three of our hubs, so Australia, the UK, and North America at the time. We used to have North America together, and since we've broken off as Canada, because we're growing, we've broken off as Canada and the US. But the number one theme was courage to have difficult conversations.
Oh, sure.
And this had a particular lens to it, that so often, and I remember getting the advice as both a school and a district leader, right? Like year one, like just come in and build relationships, don't change anything, don't rock the boat, get to know people, like good advice. But then what happens in year 2 and year 3 is leaders start feeling like, ooh, how do I now surface something that I let exist for a year under my leadership? How do I have the courage to sort of unearth these conversations, And another thing we found is that relationships are so key to leadership and leaders like pride themselves on having good relationships, that they kind of shy away from these conversations. They want to create, a culture of nice, a culture where everybody gets along and we're all here for the kids. And so anyways, I've said enough on that one, but that was the top one. Courage to have difficult conversations. A lot of fear around that one. The second one was, and I'm curious if any of these, resonate. I'd love to hear from anybody who's listening. The second one was a real need to know how to empower and coach others on their team. We hear a lot from principals around, I spend all of my time fixing everyone else's problems. I'm rescuing people. I'm, from the minute I drive onto campus in the morning to the second late at night that I close my laptop, I am solving everybody's problems and I'm exhausted, right? So it's kind of this dual, like, I can't do this anymore. I'm burning out and I need strategies to actually empower other people. So that was the second one. The third one was around engaging others. And I'll just give you, how about we do top 5? Is that good? And then we can unpack any of those because I can forever. So the third one is really about, how do I engage other people, right? I'm a leader. I want to engage, influence, encourage people to change their practice. Right. But how do I really do that? How do I influence other people to actually not just change their behavior? Because oftentimes we resort to mandates to change behavior, but it's not sustainable. So what happens if we mandate new behaviors, we haven't actually shifted anybody's mindset. And so it's really about sustainable change. And how do I do that? So that was the third theme. The fourth theme surprised me a little bit. Now, remember, we coach leaders from like very first year. I've never led before. I went from the classroom to maybe now I'm an instructional coach or maybe I'm an assistant principal, all the way through to superintendency. Number 4 is confidence. Really like confidence in self and in decisions. What I find super interesting about this is when we not only, interviewed coaches, but we also talked to our coaches. And what our coaches say, and many of our coaches coach both in the education sector, but also in the corporate sector. And our coaches will say, it's fascinating because education leaders, by and large, come in with more degrees, credentials, certificates, and yet they still have sort of this crisis of confidence. I attribute part of that to, the stakes are high. Like we're not just making decisions about a product or a business. We're making decisions that impact lives, right? The livelihood. And so many people have access to school leaders. But just interesting that kind of, resonates across all levels. And then the last one that I'll share is the fifth one was really this need to slow down. That there's this awareness, I think more so at the site level than the district level, but this awareness that I'm fighting fires all day. I'm moving so quickly, that I don't actually have the time to stop and be strategic in my thinking because there's no sub over here and there's a fight over there and there's an angry parent on the phone. Like it's just constant, right? So this need of how do I slow down? How do I move from task orientation and crossing off my never ending to-do list to human orientation and really investing in the people that are going to help me with my leadership?
Oh, man.
Sorry, I just threw a ton at you.
No, so anyone that's watching on YouTube, my head was shaking vigorously to the point where it almost fell off, because I know all 5 of those. I felt those. I have worked with folks that have verbally explained that. And then, of course, the educational leaders that I work with, I mean, those are very universal. Those are very common and all need to be addressed. And I love that you're coaching folks, not only here in the United States, but all over the world, because those are, it doesn't matter who you are. Everyone has at some point in their leadership journey felt those things. So I'm so glad that embracing messy leadership is, really focused on these aspects. But then also for those who are looking for the other 4, you got to go buy the book and, check those out, because I guarantee that you probably have either experienced it or have felt those emotions as a either building leader or district leader in education.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
I want to touch on something that you talked about, which was the adaptation of the role. Now, I've heard, and I've said this before on the podcast, that I heard someone speak once that said that to be an administrator in a building, it feels like you're on fire, the bike's on fire, everything's on fire. And I really feel like that's the case. And you threw out some wonderful examples of what you, maybe even from the time you set foot on campus, you have crisis. And so, what are some things that you help educational leaders with your coaching as far as how to be adaptive, but then also, focused on what's important in that role?
Yeah, I'm going to unpack that a little bit. One of the things that I think, and to be clear, it's now been, time gets away from you. It's been 9 years since I've been an assistant superintendent, and even longer since I've been a principal. So one of the things that was really important to me when we were researching and writing this book was to make sure that I wasn't just somebody who was preaching strategies that is so out of touch. I didn't lead, to be really clear, I didn't lead through COVID. I haven't had to deal with, the increase in school shootings or fake bomb calls. So what we did do is, as we were researching this, we asked just through our networks for leaders who were interested, who were actual principals, superintendents, assistant principals, whatever leadership role they were in. We asked for leaders who were interested in diving into the research with us and sort of we called them our messy pioneers. So in other words, every time we drafted a chapter that had strategies and stories, we would send this, and we ended up with, I think, about 50 messy pioneers. Thank you to any of you if you're ever listened to this, to say, is this grounded in reality? Like, does this strategy work? Is this an actual example that would happen? So I really have to share the credit in saying it's really a co-authored book with many voices in it, not just the leaders who are coached, but also the leaders who trialed the strategies. So in terms of strategies, part of what I think's happened since the 9 years, even I felt it when I was in a leadership position of like, this job has become so big. We've created these roles to almost be superhuman, right? That these leaders are supposed to have all the answers all the time, even about topics none of us signed up for. And we're supposed to be professional and accessible and available. And I think partly what we've done at all levels of school leadership is we've created positions where the level just below us is looking at us and saying, no, thank you. Like, that does not look like something I want to take on. And so I think we're seeing that. We're experiencing, a lack of leaders moving into roles. And then the leaders who are in the roles, what they're experiencing is burnout, exhaustion. I actually was on a phone call today with a principal who was telling me a very real story of like having a heart attack at school, largely, attributes to stress and not taking care of themselves, but not putting health and wellness first. And so I think part of what we want to do is we want to encourage leaders to say, like, you matter. you matter wholly and more than the work that you do. And to encourage leaders to take these strategies to kind of, what's the analogy? You're on an airplane, like put your oxygen mask on first.
Yes.
Like you have to. And so, that's kind of where we started. And some of the strategies will sound very simplistic, but there's strategies that we kind of go, oh yeah, I kind of know that, but I haven't put it in practice. And I'll give you one simple example. We talk a lot about time and leaders not feeling in control of time, right? That like I had a plan and I thought I was going to get in classrooms today and I thought I was going to do this, but my day got derailed. And so one of the tools that we offer with a lens of school leadership is quite simply the Eisenhower prioritization matrix of how do you decide, what's important, what's urgent, what can be delegated. And so really some practical tools of helping leaders go, yeah, we get you. You've got 1,000 balls in the air at all times. Let's help identify which ones you can drop and will bounce. You can pick them up later, and which ones are glass and like will shatter, kind of thing. So just really trying to give concrete tools where a leader could read our book from front cover to back, or could pick it up and thumb through it and go, this is the issue I'm having. I want a strategy, like kind of dive in like a choose your own adventure.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's why it's such a wonderful resource for our educational leaders, is because one, you have the data, you have the stories, but then you also have the practical tools to get them through really difficult times. And I want to touch on something that you had talked about before, Alyssa, in regards to just the emotional side of leadership. So obviously the courage and some of the imposter syndrome that you may have, but then also, like you said, it's a relationship business. And so there's a relational aspect to it. So I'm just curious how you've talked through like effectively managing the emotional side of leadership.
Yeah, there's a lot of components to that. So that's the E in messy is actually emotional connection. Perfect. And it really is, that chapter is intended for leaders to really reflect on, the relationships they have and how they show up as a leader before COVID. And I do think if there is a silver lining from a global pandemic, one silver lining that I do think happened is I do think it helped us break down a little bit of the line between personal and professional, right? It helped us for leaders who were ready. Not all leaders are ready for that, but it allowed us, I think it gave us permission to drop a little bit of the professional veneer to show up as who we are. And that's part of the emotional connection, right? Is feeling that you have the freedom and the ability to show up as you, and how you lead is going to be very different than how I lead. And there's going to be good and bad to all of that, but that's like authentic in how we lead. And so part of it is helping leaders think about how they want to show up, and then thinking about what are the elements that actually create relationships. Like it's kind of the uncommon sense that while we shy away from having a difficult conversation, once we have that difficult conversation, that actually leads to greater trust and deeper relationships. If I think back on my years of both site leadership, building leadership, and district leadership, some of the teachers or principals that I still have the strongest connection with today are teachers or principals that like we went through some stuff together. It wasn't all rosy, right? But we both had the courage to be kind and address whatever issue was at hand. And so that's part of our E chapter on emotional connection, is providing those tools to say like, it's possible and here's how to go about it. Here's
for sure. Yeah, you both have those battle scars that you've gone through, and you have the stories, and obviously you had to lean on other folks to get through that really difficult time. So yeah, I would say that's a bonding experience for sure. And I can attest to that too, that some of the folks I still am in contact, 20 years later, is because, we had some phenomenal working experiences, but also went through some just ridiculous, really heartbroken stories of having to like work through some things with some students and some teachers and some families. So yeah, I totally get that. You had talked about messy being an acronym. I was wondering real quick if you wouldn't mind sharing each word in that acronym.
Yeah, sure. Like we don't have enough acronyms in education, right? Let's just create another one. Don't expect anybody to remember this. But we love messy because we thought, wow, this is like actually it captures it, right? I don't know any leader who would say that their leadership isn't messy. The M is around meaning making, very much around co-collaboration, co-shared vision, creating together. The E, as I said, is emotional connection. The first S, because we've got two S's in messy, the first S is on sensing the future. So it's really about the uncertainty of the world in which we lead and being nimble enough in our leadership to adjust and adapt and to lead a team when we may not have the answers, right? So what's that dance? So sensing the future is all about nimbleness and flexibility. And then the second S, seizing momentum, is really about time. It's about how do you capitalize on time? What's most important? What's your greatest value, to have impact? So it's really an orientation about thinking about how you utilize time. And then the Y, in my opinion, is really the most important letter in the acronym, and it's around your leadership presence. So it really is focused on you as the leader, your confidence, how you show up. What are the mind traps that might prevent you from being your best self? So it's very personal and it's very reflective and about showing up as your sort of the best version of yourself.
I love it so much. So for those who are listening, we're going to have the link in the show notes and of course on joshstamp.com, the title of the book, Embracing Messy Leadership. I couldn't think of a better descriptor. Messy is a perfect way to describe leadership in so many ways. But then also, I love that you've created the additional acronym for educators out there. Like you said, we don't have enough of those. But I think it's actually very easy for folks to understand and get all of those wonderful strategies that we've talked through today. So with that, I would like us to go through some action items. For those who are listening, thank you so much. We appreciate you tuning in each week, but I also want you to do something after this conversation, right? Because Alyssa has provided so much wisdom and insight, but she's also going to share something for you. So Alyssa, with that, for those who are listening, maybe it's an aspiring leader or current leader, if there's something they could do tomorrow or next week to enhance their leadership journey, what would you advise them to do?
Yeah, that's great. So many ideas come to mind. The first one that I'm going to share is to think about who's on your bench. So, if you're a player, you're leading, you need at least 3 people on your bench who are not in your district and not in your family. And there's a reason for that, right? You need people, mentors, coaches, somebody that you can, share the highs and the lows of your leadership, who isn't so closely attached to you and emotionally attached. So the one good thing about this, when I started as a leader employing this device, I think my husband was much more enjoyed our time together because I wasn't like unloading all of my leadership yuck on him. And then also, there's a confidential nature. So it can be helpful. And I'm not saying don't talk to your colleagues. Of course, we need to have our colleagues in our district and our school, but distance is good. Having an outside view, having some distance when you share kind of your woes, your struggles. So that would be my first thing, is identify 3 people on your bench, not in your district and not related to you.
It's so funny because I think our significant others always get the yuck of coming home and unloading on them. So no, I think that's wonderful advice for our folks. And yeah, definitely try to highlight that. If you need someone on your bench and you don't know who that might be, please reach out to myself or to Alyssa. Obviously to Alyssa, you offer, like you said, school leadership coaching. I know that there's probably some other services that you provide with BTS Spark. So I would love for folks to connect with you, maybe find a way to ask questions or maybe even just expand on something that you've discussed today. So how can they connect with you either on social media or through your website?
Absolutely. And I love to hear from people, what works, what doesn't work, if there's questions. If you need somebody on your bench, you can find me either at btsspark.org.
Yep.
Or easier maybe is on LinkedIn. You can also find BTS Spark on LinkedIn, or you can find me, Alyssa Gallagher, on LinkedIn and connect that way.
Yeah, perfect. And as always, y'all, I have everything on the website. So joshstamper.com, head over there, or you can find it in the description for the podcast show notes or on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see Alyssa's name and how to spell her last name. And so you can find her on LinkedIn. But then also, I'd love for you to push the like and subscribe either on the Joshua Stamper page or on Teach Better's YouTube channel. So both are growing communities, and we just appreciate you tuning in each time. And if you have a question for Alyssa, you can also throw those in the comments in the videos. So like I said, appreciate everyone listening. And Alyssa, I am just amazed with just the researches you've done, all the folks that you are impacting all over the globe, and what you're doing with BTS Spark. So fortunate to have you with me to kind of pick your brain and get all those wonderful strategies for our school leaders. So with that, thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead.
Thank you. The pleasure's been all mine. Thanks for having me.